I'm now honored to welcome the last speaker of this evening. As a young man, Natan Sharansky spent 9 years in Soviet gulags for his activism in the Refusnik movement, advocating for the right of persecuted Jews to immigrate to Israel from the USSR. After his release, he immediately made Aliyah to Israel, where he embarked on what would turn out to be a long and distinguished career in public service. First as a Knesset and lawmaker and government minister, and later as a chairman of the Jewish Agency. Mr. Sharansky now serves as the chair of the Combat Antisemitism Movement Advisory Board. Mr. Sharansky, thank you for traveling from Israel to join us for the summit tonight. Welcome.
Dear Lord Mayor, my dear friends and colleagues from Combat Antisemitism Movement, mayors, it's Kaftet November today, 29th of November. It's a great day in Jewish Israeli history. That's the day when 76 years ago, United Nations voted to have Israel as a Jewish state. And there were people dancing in the streets of Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, and Jews all over the world felt that that's our answer to Holocaust. That's how the new chapter, Zionist chapter of Jewish people begins. We are coming back to our ancient motherland. And then there were these great years of building the nation, of becoming startup nation, of bringing million Jews from the former Soviet Union, of bringing more than 100,000 Jews from Ethiopia, when gathering exiles, and constant struggle for our right to be as a Jewish state in the Middle East. And just now I'm coming today from Israel, which is full of the determination to fight against Hamas, understanding that if we will not destroy Hamas, there is no future for our state. And at the same time, really agonizing every day, who are the next 10 names of our hostages, our women and babies, who will be released this day. Really, every day we have to make decision again what to choose. To choose another day with the hope that another 10 of our hostages will be released, or to go back fighting as soon as possible, because we understand it's inevitable. We have to destroy this awful enemy. And in fact, decision about the war until the winning, until the full destruction of Hamas was taken few hours after this awful pogrom. It was already said so much about this pogrom, but if you realize, if you go into the history of Jewish pogroms, and it's such a rich history, you will have to go as far as to Bogdan Khmelnytsky pogroms in the 17th century in order to find, at least in memory, something like this, because it was not simply killing of so many Jews. It was gang rape. It was burning of the whole families alive. It was cutting of the legs and heads of the babies. And the shock was immediate. The understanding that we have to fight was immediate. The turning of the most polarized society to one big fighting family was immediate. There was people were called to the army. It was the biggest mobilization in our history. In 1.5 days, 300,000 people were called to the army. 380,000 came, because Jews were coming from all over the world, coming back to Israel to fight. And then there was another shock. And the shock was how the free world reacts to this. And the first reaction was the statement of the 34 students' organizations of Harvard welcoming liberation movement, saying that that is the beginning of liberation. And I don't know if you realize, but to this day, the organizations who are fighting for the rights of women, leading organizations in America, are not ready to condemn it, the biggest rape pogrom in the modern history. They are saying they are against violence on both sides. So everything was said already this evening about this, but everybody says from his or her own perspective. So let me put it into my perspective, the one who was born in the Soviet Union and who grew in the Soviet Union and who learned from the very childhood what is Marxism-Leninism about. It was all, we had to pass every year exams on Marxism-Leninism. And it was all about that the history of the world is the history of the fight between oppressors and oppressed. And the oppressed are always right, proletarian. Oppressors are always wrong. We have to shut the oppressors. We must have the dictatorship of the oppressed. And we should not permit them to speak. And all this in the name of the equality and justice. And if in the name of the equality of justice, as Lenin said, you have to kill few hundred capitalists, you'll do it simply in order the billions will be equal and just. And they started killing. And they killed hundreds and thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds, millions, tens of millions. Tens of millions of citizens of the Soviet Union were killed in the name of justice, in the name of oppressed, fighting against oppressors. And that was this type of society which was created, in which I grew, and because any type of identity, nationality and religion were against this equality, we were deprived of our identity. I grew in the city of Donetsk, where there were tens of thousands of Jews, and the only Jewish thing in our life, there was nothing Jewish. We were all assimilated by the policy. The only Jewish thing was anti-Semitism. And there was a lot of anti-Semitism in the streets and the government policy, Soviet policy. And what is important to understand, it was clear to everybody that anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism is the same. Because when there was another campaign against Israel, everybody knew that Jews have to be concerned. It's about them. There will be purges against Jews, and vice versa. Nobody was official campaigning against Jews, but when there was campaign against cosmopolites who are not loyal to our country, when there was trials against those who want to poison our leaders, and all of them were Jewish names, everybody knew that that's a new campaign against Israel is prepared. And suddenly you can see a lot of anti-Semitic pictures which look exactly as anti-Semitic pictures in the Nazi Germany about Israel and about Jews who are not loyal to Soviet Union. So no, everybody didn't have to be Jew to know that anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism is the same. But it was also clear that that's part of dictatorship, of the so-called dictatorship of proletariat, but in fact it was vulgar, primitive dictatorship. And as every dictatorship, it needs enemies to unite their own people, internal enemies and external. And there was no better enemy than Jews, who are at the same time internal enemy and external, Israel and Jews. So, well, I was one of those who were fighting for freedom, for human rights, for our rights as Jews to live as Jews and to go to Israel, spent 9 years in prison, left here in Berlin, crossed the Glienicke Bridge, went to Israel, started my life in free world. And it was clear to me that all this anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism is part of Soviet dictatorship. And then, new experience. In fact, for me, it started big 20 years ago after the so-called Durban Conference, and I'm in the Israeli government. And Durban Conference is the first anti-racist conference of the United Nations in Durban, in South Africa. And the only result of this conference suddenly is that the new apartheid state after South Africa is defeated, the new apartheid state is Israel. And I couldn't believe it. It's like, goes like naturally. I knew very well Nelson Mandela. We compared our prison experiences. He read my memoirs when he was still in prison, and it was very interesting conversations. And look, I tell you frankly, he was sympathetic to Yasser Arafat because he felt that Yasser Arafat was in solidarity with his struggle, but at the same time, he appreciated greatly Israeli democracy. He was saying for him a great leader was also Menachem Begin. He said he showed us how you can go from the underground to develop democracy. We want to be democracy like you. That was saying Nelson Mandela in '89 when we first met. And here, the new South Africa says that Israel is apartheid, how it can be. And suddenly we see that so many people in the free world are repeating this. Well, it's not exactly that apartheid, but you know, it's kind of colonialism. And suddenly you see cartoons in European press, which are the same anti-Semitic cartoons, only like when Israeli leader with this big nose, typical anti-Semitic image, is eating Palestinian children, and the blood is dropping from his mouth. And some satiric side, it looks exactly like those anti-Semitic cartoons. And I say to the author from the Guardian newspaper, I say, don't you think it's anti-Semitism? It reminds me exactly anti-Semitism that I know. He said, no, it's only criticism of Israeli policy. And then another intellectual from Europe is coming to Israel and saying, I was in Palestinian refugee camp, that is Auschwitz of today. I have to say, I was many times in refugee camps. I think it's a shame that 4 generations of Palestinians live in refugee camps. And I'm ready to debate with anybody who has to be blamed and how we can improve it. But what it has to do with Auschwitz? And they say, well, that's the way how we express our disagreement about Israel. And again, then the question of the legitimacy of having Jewish state in the Middle East, as one of the French leaders told me then, that if only you were not insisting that you're a Jewish state, like we now in Europe, we don't insist, Germany, France, we are all Europeans. Why can't you be simply the state for all the citizens of the Middle East? And when you hear, well, I think now with the war between Ukraine and Russia, everybody can understand the difference between imperialist nationalism, which the aim is to destroy the others, and the nationalism, democratic nationalism, which helps people to fight for their right to be free. And then I proposed my 3 Ds, which at the time became very accepted: the demonization of Israel, the legitimization of Israel, and double standard. These are exactly the weapons of anti-Semites for 1,000 years, and that is anti-Semitism. And then there was a debate, more debate, and finally there was international definition, which is important because it really helps to connect anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism when criticism of Israel turns into anti-Semitism. And I'm so glad that Combat Antisemitism Movement devotes a lot of effort to make this international definition to be recognized by another country, by another city, by another university. It's very important. But something else happened in these 20 years, and which brings us exactly to what happened just in these weeks. The so-called woke movement, the so-called critical social theories. If you take critical race theory, replace the word race by the word class, you'll get exactly word in word Marxism-Leninism in the most primitive way. Because these theories say that all the world is fight between oppressors and oppressed, and oppressors are always wrong, and oppressors are always right, and we have to prohibit the oppressors to speak. We have to fight with them. And Israel is oppressor, and Palestinians are oppressed, and that's why they are always right. And this crazy theory becomes really popular in universities, among intellectual elites. And, well, first of all, it reminds me so much of the Marxism. You know, the early Marxists in Russia welcomed pogroms of the 1881 Kishinev pogroms, others. Why they welcomed them? Because that is the beginning of the fight against capitalism. Because people are fighting against, on these pogroms, not against Jews. They are fighting because they think that they are those who are exploiting them, against oppressors. And that's exactly what happened now. How it can be that this most awful pogrom of modern times, unbelievable massacre, the first response of the elites of the free world, the first response is that it's this liberation movement. Then when they understood that it's a little bit embarrassing, they said, okay, we are against violence on both sides. As if there is no difference between those who came to kill us and us who are trying to protect our right to live, because Hamas says again and again on TV. In America, I saw how they open answering, yes, we'll do it again and again and again until Jews will not leave Middle East. They ask, well, you mean occupied territories? They said, no, all Israel is occupied territory, from the river to the sea. And so those who are saying that Israel has to be destroyed from the river to the sea, and then people come on the demonstration of solidarity, and somehow it begins from this, and what it finishes, you saw. In Sydney it finished with gas to the Jews. In London it's more moderate, death to the Jews. And suddenly you don't have to prove what we in Combat Antisemitism. I spent 20 years proving that there is direct connection between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. There is nothing to prove. People say it absolutely openly, that death to Israel and death to Jews goes together. And that's why we are in such a critical moment. Israel has to defeat Hamas. We simply have no choice. If we want to continue, and we will continue to exist, and Israel is the best place for the Jews to live as Jews in freedom. But we have to fight for this. But anti-Semitism in the most vulgar way came to London, where Jews are taking away mezuzahs in the center of London. They're afraid to have mezuzahs. To Paris, where rabbis are saying that children should not go in kippah in the streets. In Sydney, everywhere, not speaking about Harvard and Yale. And as it was said here many times, and as Elie Wiesel was saying always, it starts with Jews, it never finishes with Jews. The moment this hatred to Jews comes to the life, the hatred to the other comes, and Islamophobia comes, and hatred to Christians comes, and hatred to anybody who is different, who doesn't agree with you comes, and that is the end of free speech, and that's the end of the world of human rights that we are fighting and are fighting. And that's why it is so important that after all, it all starts from the community, from the mayors, from the cities. And that's why it's great that we all are here, and I hope we will learn lessons not only from the past, but from these last weeks. Thank you.